Hi, I'm Libby Rodney, the Chief Strategy Officer at the Harris Poll. I'm sitting here with Alison Moore, CEO of Chief. How are you doing, Alison?
I'm doing well. I'm staying a little cool. It feels nice in here.
It does feel nice, doesn't it? So we're sitting here at Cannes, and creativity is everywhere. It's the biggest celebration. All the leaders are here. And what we're noticing with the awards this year is that, the creativity that is on display by volatility plus inspiration. And you've had a lot of, your career transformation has always sat at the center of disruption, 2 decades of disruption, but you somehow thrive through that disruption. Well, the rest of us are exhausted by it. How do you do that?
I feel like I am just a person who is naturally energized by change.
Okay.
I think, and it's not change from disruption and chaos as its core. It's change for evolution. And I've had the benefit and the pleasure and the privilege of working at some very interesting companies who I think saw changes around the corner and internally had to operationalize to understand what those changes were and build new teams, new processes, new thinking, new strategies side by side with a core business that was likely in high success. But with future thinking, you understand that the landscape is going to change, and how do you parallel path that?
Right.
And in that instance, I love being the person brought in to kind of work through that. So, whether that was HBO or Daily Candy, even at NBC Universal with TV Everywhere, SoundCloud, Condé Nast, and frankly, even Comic Relief, where I was CEO for 5.5 years, which is a nonprofit and a social impact organization, but one that has to, in that sector, constantly react to change.
Right.
And certainly over, I was CEO at that point during COVID. So that was the macro change for everybody. But I think that's just that's inherent in me, and I seek those sort of roles out, and so too with my new kind of role in 4.5 months at Chief.
Yeah. Tell us about that. So, they're Chief. I've been part of Chief forever, and
Yes,
it's
OG,
amazing.
yeah.
OG. And listen, these women, these executive leaders, are the masters in their craft. They're amazing. But the business, the creative landscape is changing nonstop.
Yep.
It's changing monthly, and we're always having something kind of knock on our door. How do you help women executives? Like, how do you think about that as developing that kind of anticipatory change muscle, that flex muscle?
Yeah. The dexterity that's required today for anybody that's just in the working environment, it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
I think when you're in the creative space and the disruption and the disorientation that's happening for every executive, every team, I mean, I think it can be mind spinning. And for us, we hope at Chief to be a community of folks that are, insofar as you're in a community of women leaders who are all dealing with these. And it's not just in the creative sector. It's not in the advertising and marketing sector. It is in pharma and biotech and retail, every social impact. To have a group of people that you can have that commonality and start to have discussion and frankly learn from the cross-section of other industries.
Right.
I do think there's benefit in stepping out of the swirl of everyone being in the marketing and advertising and media business
100%.
because everyone's solutioning may be the same way, and some of that conversation becomes a little bit of a circle.
Yeah.
So for us, it's exposure to community.
Yep.
It's bringing in interesting ideas to kind of spark thought.
Yeah.
And that can be on things like, we had Kate Jensen from Anthropic come at one of our clubhouses in New York. And, she's an incredibly human individual. I mean, it sounds funny, but she is a woman, a mother, running all of the commercial business for Anthropic, and her way of sort of dissecting the fear and the exhilaration about AI was a completely different context. And you could see all of the chief women sitting there, just like mind spinning, like how am I going to take this back to my organization and my leadership style? But whether it's AI, whether it's tariffs, return to office, how you flex with the Gen Zs and Gen Xs in your office, but also things like what's happening in my vertical.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think the other thing, which everyone should be thinking about, but we really think about with chief women, what's the off button look like?
Yeah.
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 And how do you have a little bit of that threaded through your kind of hustle.
Yeah.
Because it is a hustle.
Yeah, sure.
And then the last thing I'll say too, and this is really, you can see this in the chief community.
Yeah.
The executive woman's journey is not linear. And, women come into chief, they have an experience that's deeply personal about their own career journey, and then they morph and change.
Yeah.
And so a Fortune 500 executive who's clipped in at a really big company that's been doing XYZ may at chief turn into an entrepreneur. May at chief turn into a founder, a fractional, a permanent board person. And that in that molting is change. And that's what I want to think about the women leaders in a more holistic way, as opposed to what's your next role. I mean, that's interesting, but not as much anymore. It's a bigger question.
It sounds like because the future of work and the ecosystem of what we do and the portfolio of careers is changing. So
it's changing right in front of us. I mean, the AI piece, I think, is, I do personally feel excited by it because I've always been just to the change point. I love the idea of what technology can do and unfold and unfurl, but, I mean, as a mother, as a leader, it's, how are we going to be working?
Right.
And what will be, and a woman of a certain age, what's my work rhythm going to be in 5 years, given the disruption that's happening and the dislocation? And I think women are resilient. I feel that way. But let me start talking about it now before it lands in my lap. And I think I want that spirit for my chief crew.
No, I love that. And it also sounds like a major theme of that, or where we have turned the dial and have started shifting, is leadership was always kind of approached at such an individualistic level, right? You have your individual coach, you have your succession plan. It's a one-to-one thing. But what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that it's really the community factor, and it can be really isolating if you experience change as an individual industry. And there's so much to learn in a more holistic framework together.
I can't stress that enough. And it's multi-layered, and that's the interesting thing about Chief as a community, is that I can come in and learn from people who are big CEO folks at big companies, and there's something to be learned there. I can learn from people who are actually not from my industry. My core group at Chief was actually people in finance and banking, and I mean, that's not my background. Some of their advice and perspective, I learned a few things, Oh,
I did
and
too.
then I just think, again, that fluidity of, I've learned so many things from people who are actually in transition, and they're learning things about themselves. And I don't know, I just feel like that's how I'm going to level up my game. And I think, to your point, when I say level up my game now, like in 2019, 18, 17, whatever, in the past, it might have been one thing where you're like, leveling up my game means my next title.
Right.
I don't think that's everyone's sort of trajectory necessarily anymore. That's not the only question that they're asking themselves. They're asking themselves, what do I want with my career? And they're giving themselves permission to be a baller and not be a title with an office and some sort of card. And I love that, because there are women at Chief who are like, I was a fashion executive at XYZ, and now I'm doing something on my own, and I'm making great bank, and I have great contacts, and I'm loving that part of my new kind of career journey,
Right, which the community supports. Like
100%. That's what it's about. You don't have to be an executive. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, that's where Chief started out, because in 2018, 19, it was around executive leadership and a facet. And that facet still exists, and we have it at Chief. But it's that plus. And how do you figure out what that kaleidoscope is for women? And that's been my journey.
Right.
I feel that strongly as a chief member and someone in this community. So how do we build the right experiences to just kind of continue to map? And to your question on change, we have to iterate. Like, this is what we're talking about right now. Next year is going to be, a 50% massive shift, and I'm sure it'll be a different thing. But we as an organization have to continue to produce something different for our members around that, and look around the corners.
Yeah, I love that, because Wall Street Journal just came out with an article that said, 25% of CEOs are voluntarily leaving this year. And they're changing because they they're seeing different career paths for themselves, and they're saying, I don't want this anymore. And so A, the C-suite might have to change.
Yeah.
But B, there's just a different way of finding value out in the world and adding value.
That's right.
And I feel like Chief is getting on top and ahead of that curve.
The thing that keeps popping in our minds is powerful together.
Yeah.
There is power in this. I've been around the 4.5 months, visited basically every clubhouse location and every place where we have, with Chief X's and everything, which has been awesome. But that energy, that hive, it fills the cup.
Yep.
And, you don't have to be in that all the time. You've got your work life, you have your family life, all this kind of stuff. But a little bit of a shot in the arm around that is powerful, because these are the decisions people are going to be facing. And I don't think it's necessarily stepping out of the sea level and then going in. I mean, maybe people want to do this sitting on a beach, or
no.
I'm not in a financial position to be, checking out and starting whatever, selling seashells on the shore.
Yeah.
I still have, I have things to do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I'm going to have a linear path. And
Right.
what does that look like, and how do we support? And I think doing that together, best outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to be in the arena still,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No matter
Everybody I
what
talk to does.
title
Yeah.
it is. It's about being in the arena,
I know.
making an impact, using all your expertise.
That's a great way to put
doing
it.
something with it.
And I think every chief woman that I talk to, I don't care whether they are, C-level, founder, entrepreneur, fractional, or in transition.
Yeah.
They all want to be in the arena.
Yeah.
That's why they're here.
Yep.
So I reject the idea that it has to be some sort of pre-sold in structured identity
Yep.
that someone else placed.
Yes.
You do you.
Yeah.
And Chief should be here to help you do you. And that's what we're here to do, and we'll do it together.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Allison, thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time
Thank you
today.
for
And
so
it was
much.
just great
Nice
talking
to talk
to
to
you
you. Yeah.
and catch up at
Yeah.
Sports Beach.
Yeah.
So great.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.